Jesse Williams, a chaplain on the Alaska pipeline in the 70s, made friends with many of the ruling elite. He was told that the elite consider themselves to be gentlemen and think not informing the general public of their plans is unsportsmanlike. That they need to tell the people, so they use news and movies to put forth their fair warning. Okay? Now, who's the most subtle beast of the field? So, are we expected to see the ruling elite come out on worldwide television? No. Instead, they're going to do it very subtly, because that's the way the beast speaks, okay? Very subtly. This makes them feel empowered to see their victims totally helpless and unable to prevent their own demise after given fair warning. So, have the elite given us fair warning? Have they? Yes, we have been warned. In October 2005, Stephen Dollins was thrust into a global scene when the Lord showed him the Illuminati card game, predicted many events of the past and future, and he made the very popular DVD Illuminati game Blueprint for World Domination. Today, there are many websites dedicated to just the Illuminati cards. In the early 1990s, the Secret Service attempted to stop the distribution of this deck of cards called Illuminati New World Order. Subtly, because that's the way the beast speaks, okay? Very subtly. This makes them feel empowered to see their victims totally helpless and unable to prevent their own demise after given fair warning.
The Eiffel Tower is widely considered one of the world's most beautiful buildings and a testament to French chic. So how do you improve this iconic structure? How about a giant disco ball? The tower received the questionable addition as part of Bastille Day celebrations, which commemorates the start of the French Revolution. And what better way to mark the storming of a prison than by turning the city into a giant outdoor nightclub, blasting out hits from the Bee Gees, Donna Summer and ABBA.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. 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 No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
wild.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number 322.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322, secret number?
There are all kinds of secrets.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
Be strong in the Lord, and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places.
There's a lot of important, new, stunning information coming from the Paris terrorist attacks that have grave implications. In this video, we're going to give you facts, sources, reports, and evidence showing you how the French government knew that these attacks were going to happen. Let's take a look at the evidence. Just a few days ago, before the terrorist attack in Paris, France, on Thursday, November 5th, German police intercepted a car with 8 AK-47s, grenades, TNT, with Paris programmed into the navigation system. The car was driven by a 51-year-old Montenegrin man who was crossing the Austria-German border. This report collaborates a new report by Jack Murphy, who is an 8-year Special Army Operations veteran, who, according to his sources, the French and German police knew that the attacks were coming a month prior. He reports that the French National Police were meeting with the German BKA Federal Police and the BND Federal Intelligence Services, which is the equivalent of the American NSA, FBI, and CIA, to discuss an imminent pre-planned terrorist attack in Paris that was going to go after soft civilian targets. They even talked about how this attack wasn't a matter of if it was going to happen, but when it was going to happen.
Who's the most subtle beast to defeat? So, are we expected to see the ruling elite come out on worldwide television? No. Instead, they're going to do it very subtly, because that's the way the beast speaks, okay? Very subtly. This makes them feel empowered to see their victims totally helpless and unable to prevent their own demise after given fair warning. The elite consider themselves to be gentlemen and think not informing the general public of their plans is unsportsmanlike, that they need to tell the people, so they use news and movies to put forth their fair warnings.
The French and German police knew that the attacks were coming a month prior,
and think not informing the general public of their plans is unsportsmanlike.
Knew that the attacks were coming a month prior.
The elite consider themselves to be gentlemen.
Well, let's now talk to political journalist and author Gerard O'Coleman, who joins us from Paris this evening. Thanks very much for joining us again on RT International. You're in the French capital. What's the mood and atmosphere in the city right now?
We're being told that there's a state of war and a state of emergency. We've had this before. We had this in January, and for several weeks we had non-stop sirens and non-stop chatter on the radio about the threat from radical Islam and terrorist groups and so on. And so we're having a kind of a replay of that, but it has been, I think, accentuated, and we're going to have an intensification of the media campaign, which is essentially a propaganda campaign to make people in France fear Muslims. We need to be clear about the origin of the war on terror. The war on terror is, I quote, orchestrated from abroad. These are the words François Hollande used to describe this terrorist attack. Well, the attacks that have been continuing to destroy Syria, to massacre its population, have also been orchestrated from abroad. They were orchestrated by NATO, and they've been carrying these attacks out against the civilian population of Syria for 4 years now. And this is a terrorist campaign that is also orchestrated from abroad. And people in Europe need to understand that there is a war that is becoming global, that is being waged against civilian populations in particular. It is a form of neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism which aims to divide and conquer European and Middle Eastern and African and the world's population, for that matter, and to make them submit to a global order that does not serve the interests of most of the people on this planet, but that does serve the interests of a very few ruling elite, a very small, tiny, and particularly tyrannical ruling elite. There is no war on terror. There is a war that is being waged using proxy groups terrorist proxy groups, and they are being used against nation states who are resisting US and Israeli hegemony, and they are also being used as a means of disciplining the workforces in Europe. In a period of mass unemployment and austerity, you now have terrorist attacks being committed by terrorists funded, armed and trained by Western intelligence agencies. There is no such thing as ISIS. ISIS is a creation of the United States. We know that from official sources of the US military themselves. Declassified documents from the Defense Intelligence Agency have confirmed that. And the French government is now attempting to drum up support for more military intervention in Syria. And what they want to do is they want to get in on the game. The game is almost lost. The Russians have routed much of the Islamic State. You now have Islamic State militants coming into Europe disguised as refugees. That will destabilize Central Europe, and the French government wants to get in on the game in Syria and prop up those so-called moderate rebels. There are no moderate rebels, of course, in Syria. There are Al-Qaeda and ISIS militants, terrorists who have been beheading people, eviscerating people, absolutely creating chaos and genocide right across the region, and this does not serve the Syrian people or anyone other than the Western corporate elites and their geopolitical interests.
What do you expect France to do now in the light not only of Friday's terrorism, but 10 months on from Charlie Hebdo? It's not going to ease up on what it's doing, is it?
No. Much depends on how the French public will react. If they will, we are being bombarded now with a media propaganda campaign. There's this non-stop talk where we're told not to go out in the street. We're supposed to be fearful and keep quiet and so on. I think there is going to be a campaign against dissidents in France. They're very worried about the new media that has emerged in recent years, and they are very worried about the alternative media. So I think there you will see, we saw this actually after the attacks in January, you will see a conflation of terrorism and dissidents. So one of the tools which the mass media uses to discredit any kind of rational questioning of the established order, and particularly the war on terrorism, is to deride those who would question the war on terrorism as conspiracy theorists. And I think you're going to see a crackdown on so-called conspiracy theorists and websites that actually publish rational and honest analysis of what is happening. So you're going to see more of that type of intellectual terrorism, which is already at a boiling point in France. I mean, it's got to the point now where you have professors in universities who are being intimidated. You have school teachers who are basically being fired for even suggesting that there may be a link between French imperialism and terrorism. There was one case recently, for example, of a school teacher who almost lost his job when he suggested there might be a link between French foreign policy and terrorism. So we are going through a period of deep intellectual terrorism. And of course, these random terrorist acts, which are a form of low-intensity civil war. I think that the current crisis, the refugee crisis, which is really a form of coercive engineered migration, because they could have easily have been prevented, this form of coercive engineered migration is going to make this a lot worse, and it is going to create the conditions of civil war. It is a natural consequence, of course, of globalization, of financial capitalism. This is essentially what it leads to. I mean, it leads to a breakdown of society. And the only way in which they can kind of keep everybody down is by a policy of divide and conquer. So you're going to see a situation where you've got very much a Wahhabized working class in France. They're being Wahhabized by the allies of the French political elite, the Saudis and the Qataris. They're building Wahhabite mosques all over the place. And that is going to Wahhabize the youth, and they're going to be then used as pawns, if you like, in much bigger geopolitical wars, proxy wars against Russia, proxy wars against Iran in the Middle East, and so on. And that is going to create massive social unrest. It's going to divide working people against each other. And the only people who are going to actually benefit from this are the war contractors, the military, industrial, media, intelligence complex.
raining again.
Are we expected to see the ruling elite come out on worldwide television? No. Instead, they're going to do it very subtly.
intensification of the media campaign, which is essentially a propaganda campaign to make people in France fear Muslims. We need to be clear about the origin of the war on terror. The war on terror is, I quote, orchestrated from abroad, and people in Europe need to understand that there is a war that is becoming global, that is being waged against civilian populations in particular. It is a form of neo-imperialism and neo-colonialism.
Arise, shine, for thy light is come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings to the brightness of thy rising. Lift up thine eyes round about and see. All they gather themselves together. They come to thee. Thy son shall come from far, and thy daughter shall be nursed at thy side. Then thou shalt see, and flow together,